So today we're looking at the anatomy of a miracle and asking the question, is a miracle a breach of nature or is it a path to freedom? So there's two ways we think of miracles often. When you think of a miracle, do you envision an extraordinary occurrence that is some form of divine intervention transcending the laws of nature? Isn't this one of the first things that comes to mind when we think of Jesus as a miracle worker? And the reason I'm on this subject is because I'm on it in my book, in a section talking about Jesus as the miracle worker. There's several ways that he is defined, and one of those, of course, is Son of God. One is a miracle worker. One is apocalyptic prophet. One is kind of a social reformer. There's a lot of ways to look at him, and what I'm discovering is that what we might call a miracle that he's performed is a lot simpler, that it has become something more over time, and I'll get into that in a moment. But I'm not a student of the Course in Miracles. I've read probably all of the main textbook and highlighted much of it, but it just, and I'm all for it. I know several of you are into it, but my understanding is that that course approaches miracles more as a shift of perception than some unusual anomaly that we see in, it's a change of mind that can bring about big changes, and I totally embrace that idea, and that's how I think we ought to approach Jesus as a miracle worker. When I was in ministerial school, we were introduced to the 5 M's of a developing religious movement. And I have since found that the corporate world also has their system, their 5 M's system. There's actually several people that use this idea, and I didn't realize that at the time. But the 5 M's of the developing religious movement, especially Christianity, is the first is the man, Jesus. That's where we start. His message, his ministry, the movement that follows his death, the monument, which is today's Christian religion, which is a multi-billion-dollar industry, as you know. Catholic and Protestant, the whole shebang, that's the monument, the legacy. And the monument is actually the product of the movement, not of the man. Very important distinction to make. As a matter of fact, the whole New Testament is a product of the movement. We have nothing written by the man, nothing left by the man except word of mouth, passing on ideas, things that people remembered him teaching. And by the time the first gospel was written, as I have said many times, it was around 70 AD, 40 some years after his death. So if you heard a rumor and passed it on to somebody, and 40 years later heard that same rumor that somebody read back to you or said back to you, it would probably look quite different. It's like the game telephone. Any of you ever play that? You form a circle, and you start with an idea and whisper in the person next to you, whisper in their ear. It goes clear around the circle. By the time it gets back, it is a different story. So if that circle is so big it takes 40 years to get around, you can imagine that the story would be quite different. So when we have these images of Jesus as this larger-than-life miracle worker, we are probably looking at a very exaggerated presentation of who he was. And it's not to say that things didn't happen, that things, that he got people's attention and so on. But I think he got people's attention for reasons other than we're told. And as I just think about the guy walking around talking, getting people's attention, what would it have been that made them interested? And I think the answer to that is he was a good teacher who taught with authority and taught things that might help their personal experience, help their personal life get a little bit better. That's why I was drawn to Unity, so I can understand it from that point of view. Something that lights me up, something that opens my mind to greater possibilities. So I could see him teaching with authority. I could see him becoming a healer. I was reading some of the medical practices back in his day, and unless you were open to having a hole bored in your skull to have demons released or whatever, you might be interested in first talking to a faith healer. So I think Jesus had a good bedside manner. People trusted him, and that they would turn to him, and he developed a reputation for healing. And if you don't believe that kind of thing can happen, read the Quimby manuscripts about Phineas Parkhurst Quimby up in Maine back in around 1866, I think, mid-1800s, considered the grandfather of the New Thought movement in America. He healed people by changing their minds, by gaining their trust, by giving them new ways of thinking. And he made the newspaper several times with articles suggesting he might be the return of Jesus. He had some very spectacular healings. He would say that people would, just before they called the morgue, they would call him. He's like a last-ditch effort. And people thought there was magic involved. They thought all kinds of things. But he explains exactly how he got people to change their mind, which would bring about the healing, to see a different picture. So I think Jesus was a healer. And when we put him as a healer in the miracle arena, I think we do ourselves a disservice. I think there's probably an explanation for all of it, and I don't want to minimize him. Actually, I think putting him in the miracle category does minimize what he actually did, what he actually taught. First of all, it separates us from him. It puts him in a different category, and I think we need to be in the same category. He was a human being expressing his spiritual identity, saying, what I'm doing, you can do also. And I take him in that sense at his word, that he was not an extraordinary human being in the sense that he was more capable than the rest of us. He was more aware. And that awareness that he had, we could have also, and we could actually do greater things according to him. The image of Jesus, the miracle worker, is the product not of meticulous biographical research, but of the movement that followed his death. So you have the man, the message, and his ministry, very different from the ministry of the movement. And you'll read all about that in the book of Acts. What you find in the book of Acts, what you find in the Gospels, is a Jesus teaching this idea the kingdom is within you. Go into your inner room, pray to your Father in secret. As I've said, the Sermon on the Mount, he refers to your Father 11 times and our Father one more time, our Father who art in heaven. The Lord's Prayer, he teaches us to pray not for his Father. He didn't start the Lord's Prayer with pray like this, my Father, Jesus' Father. Either he's talking about two fathers, which he's not, because he was a Jew. He believed in one God, and so there was one Father. So the movement is what pried the Father out of our hands and put it solely in Jesus, the only begotten Son of God. That's a product of the movement, not of the man and his message. So we need to keep that in mind. And if we're looking at asking the question, who was Jesus? We focus on the man, the message, and his ministry. Because when we get beyond that, and all of the New Testament is a product of the movement that followed his death. Keep that in mind. Earliest writing about 52 AD, the letters of Paul. And then the Gospels come along beginning at 70, then 80, 90, and then probably 95 to 100, John. Very, very separate from the man and his ministry. So that movement is a ministry, but it's a ministry of the movement. It's not a ministry of the man. There's a big, big difference. So it's just important for us to keep that distinction in mind when we're considering who was this guy. And that's the question I've posed to myself. He posed it, but I take it personally. Who do you say that I am? I think we all have an obligation to answer that question, and to answer it from the perspective of our studies, from our meditative periods, just our thinking, our logical thinking, and how all this came about. And the more we understand how this was generated, how the story we have of Jesus was generated. Like, do I think he could turn water into wine? Do I think that actually happened? I don't know. But do I care? I would like to know how to do that, but I don't. Save a lot of money. But it's, does that make him who he was? If it does, then he's on another planet. He's coming from somewhere else. And it separates him from us. But we have to ask ourselves all of these things, and here's an idea that it's possible that many of the miracle stories we read had their beginning not as an event, but as a parable. Through the use of parables, Jesus taught truth using fiction. Through 4 decades of the fluid process of oral tradition, parables of Jesus could easily transform into stories about Jesus, where he's actually one of the players. He could have started telling the story. The one I use all the time about the man by the pool of Bethesda. Maybe he didn't even talk to that guy. Maybe he just happened by that day, and somebody announces the waters are being stirred, and the guy acts like he doesn't hear that. Then he does hear it, but he gets up kind of slow. And maybe Jesus is just saying, I wonder if that guy really wants to be healed. And then he creates a parable based on that idea, because we have seen many people, including ourselves, that maybe we don't want to be healed so rapidly, so quickly, that maybe we don't want the responsibility that goes along with that ability to walk. I think that's very possible. When Jesus is sitting with people and he sees the widow give 2 mites, and everybody else is giving all this, largest amount of money, and he said she's giving the most. Well, that's almost a parable, but it's based on a real life experience. We talk about that story still today. What it means, the value of giving, what's really happening when we're giving. And he's saying she's giving more than anybody. Well, that's a parable, but it's based on an experience. So that's very possible that so-called miracles turn into stories where the writers put Jesus in the picture as the miracle worker. The feeding of the 5,000. That's really kind of misleading, because how many people would have to be there if the 5,000 were men. They would have had probably their wives, their kids. It's very possible we're talking not 5,000, but 10, maybe 15,000. How many of you believe that is possible? You get upset when 6 people come over for dinner. We know the preparation involved there, but of course we're not miracle workers. But that story very well could be based on the story of Elijah, where he goes to a widow's house during a time of drought. And he says, give me something to eat. She said, all I have is a handful of meal and a little bit of oil, and I was planning on making a cake for my son and myself and then die because we have nothing else. There's a drought going on. Elijah says, well, make that for me, and you will have more. And sure enough, she does that, gives the cake to Elijah, and has enough meal. It keeps manifesting somehow. It keeps coming, the oil and the meal keep coming until the drought is over. So it's very possible, that the story grew out of something like that. And I'm not saying that story is, we should take it literally either, because, I don't know, so far back, but it is probably something that started that looked like a miracle of some kind and became, the story that there's so much of that in the Bible that is probably, if we actually knew what happened, it wouldn't seem so miraculous. But the writers do that for a reason. They're trying to make a point. And they're trying to say God is involved here and, open your mind to that greater thing. When we look at the miracles attributed to Jesus, they have a common formula. There's a need is stated. Jesus challenges people to stop judging by appearances. Those stifled by the apparent problem agree to at least try to change their mind. Jesus speaks a command or orders some action. The answer is forthcoming. And the 4 miracles I'm dealing with, the so-called miracles I'm dealing with in the book, are the Pool of Bethesda, the big catch where Jesus is talking to a group of people that's large enough where he gets in a boat and they push him out a little bit, has a sermon from the boat. We don't know what he says, but the fishermen are washing their nets, which means they didn't catch anything, so they're cleaning up, and he would know that. But he says to Simon, and the Simon, we don't know who this Simon is. It's not Peter, apparently. But he says, put out again, and Simon says, well, we've been out all night and had no luck. So he said, well, just do it. So it's the same formula. There's a problem. We have no fish. Jesus suggests something. He gives a command, go out, let's go out again. And so they do. First they doubt, and then they agree. They change their mind. And they throw the net in, and there's so much that it nearly sinks 2 boats. It's a huge catch. Feeding the 5,000, we all know that. The disciples say, send everybody home. We don't have enough food. That's the doubt. And Jesus says, you take care of it. We'll take care of it. And they, nobody believes that. They have 2 loaves and a couple of fishes, or 5 loaves, whatever it is. The number is, it's impossibly small. But then he lifts up his eyes. He gives thanks for what they have, and has the disciples begin to pass it out, and it is. There's enough for everybody, plus 12 baskets full. And I think it's George Lamsa that asks, where did the 12 baskets come from? You can get kind of down on the details of that. And then the epileptic boy, he casts himself in the fire and all this, and the disciples try to heal him. They can't, and Jesus gets very angry at him. Kind of chastises him in front of everybody and embarrasses him, I'm sure. But he asked the father, how long has this boy been doing this? He said, since he was a youth. And the man said, if you can do anything, please do. And Jesus said, if you can, if you believe, all things are possible. So the man says, I believe, help my unbelief. He changes his mind. So that's the key. So are we talking about something miraculous, or are we talking about changing our mind when we are faced with something that we don't know how to solve? Are we looking at it like, this has been going on as long as this boy's been alive? There's too many people here to feed. We've been fishing all night. What's the use of going back out? Or I've been here for 38 years and life doesn't change too fast. But what happens if you change your mind and you recognize that there is something working in us? It's just like if you hold a seed in your hand, the power to grow that seed is present. The mechanism to grow that seed is present. You've got to drop it in the ground. You've got to do something different. I own this seed. I don't want to lose it. Change your mind. Okay, I will drop this seed in the ground. I don't know if it's going to work or not. But that's the way you put into motion the mechanics of the universe, the manifestation side of it. It's already here. It's already present. Is a growing seed a miracle? I think it is. We're watching a couple of rows of corn come up now, and there was nothing there prior to the planting of those seeds. And it's really a pretty miraculous thing. It's just that we see it so common that we take it out of the miracle category. But does anybody really know how it works? What is that invisible energy that makes that happen? And what we come down to is the whole universe is complete right now, and it's fully functioning. The mechanism to grow a seed is here now, but you've got to do something to engage that process. So with the seed, you drop the seed in the ground. That's the thing you do different. But with your life, you change your mind. You see things from a new perspective. I believe, help thou my unbelief. And that's the thing that we see in all of these stories. And I'm just including 4, but I've gone through several. I could talk all day about it, probably. But you find the same formula in all of these so-called miracles. And there's always a change of mind in all of them, and that, to me, is the key to the miracle. It's not this larger-than-life process that we see, that's published by the movement, a product of the movement. We want to make this Jesus guy something special. He's got to be something special, or people won't believe in him. We've got to have this guy be a miracle worker. We've got to have him be unusual. We've got to have him rise from the dead, ascend to heaven and sit at the right hand of God, and with the promise that he'll come back and establish the kingdom. But I would again ask the question, if, like with the epileptic boy, or whatever he had, it says he had demons. If Jesus had a special healing power, why would he go into a dialogue with the Father? Why bother doing that? Why not just go over and touch the boy and heal him and just be done with it? Why not just walk over to the man by the pool and take his hand, lift him up, and heal him? And then go get the rest of the invalids that are hanging around that pool. I don't think he had special power. I think he was believable. He could get people's trust. He gained people's trust, and that's a huge thing. I think if today we would go to a doctor that we don't trust, we would not have as good of luck with him as one that we do fully trust. That bedside manner, that's a very important thing. When my father had his stroke, we had a psychiatrist that was on the case that was just there. He was like a floating fixture that showed up, and very cold, and just, he was doing his job. And his bedside manner was absolute icicle, just absolute. I didn't like the guy. I didn't want to be around him, didn't care what he had to say, because my father was on a sheet of paper to him. and that was it. But there were other medical professionals that got involved. They got into his life, his mind, his case as much as they possibly could. And that makes a huge difference. It makes a difference to the family, how we were responding. And you get people, when somebody walks in the room and everybody clams up because that person is giving off these negative vibes, that's not a healing presence. So I think that's extremely important, and I think Jesus had that. The catalyst for change involves a change of mind, a redirection of faith. As we think of our own experience, can we accept the challenge of refusing to judge a situation by its appearance? Can we change the focus of our faith? Can we, like the father of the epileptic boy, believe that with God all things are possible? Can we change our mind when we're confronted with something? May not be easy to do. I say this all the time because it's not easy to do, but try it. If you've got something going on right now and you feel like you're backed into a corner, can you look at that same thing or let it go even and say there's something working through me, that my change of mind is the planting of a seed and another process takes over? Can I look at it from that point of view? The seed does not grow itself. That's what's interesting. What does? What grows itself? What grows the seed? And if you think of it, it's the mechanism of the universe. Just think of it that way because it's impersonal, but it's very focused. When something happens, when a certain thing happens, there's a certain response that follows. In Unity, we call that the law of mind action. Thoughts held in mind produce after their kind. So that's really the principle we see through all these miracles. Somebody changes their mind. And I think Jesus had that ability to go into a situation and change people's minds, not in a coercive way, in a way that goes against their will necessarily, but a way that invites them to see the situation from a different perspective. A shift in perception, that's the miracle. But what we have probably is these miracle stories, again, are the product of the movement. So we've got to kind of sort through that larger than life aspect and see what is the principle behind this story. What do we get out of this? And I'm finding that is the treasure buried in the field. You look at the field, it's the gospel stories. But there's a treasure there that we don't readily see. We've got to sell everything we own concerning that, the whole religious thing, and we've got to let go of this larger than life picture of Jesus and just say, what's the principle here? And we look for repetition. We look for repeating formulas. That's what's important. That's the core of the change. And so I think that's makes it pretty exciting. Like a river, the creative life force flows in but one direction, from the inside out. Jesus told people to cleanse the inside of the cup first. That is, focus your faith, envision the highest, most successful outcome. There's so many things he says like that could get past us if we're not thinking in this direction. But the river flows in but one direction. It goes downhill. This creative life force, the thing that grows the corn, it does it from the inside out. It works from within the seed, because if the seed's not there, you can't see that process. But that's true every place we look. And so if we think to ourselves, the kingdom of God is working within me, it's from within out. That's the creative life force. And I am, through my thinking, through my faith, the direction of my faith, help thou my unbelief. Help my redirection of faith. That's the seed. That's the change of mind. And that same creative life force comes through us. You know, Jesus said that if you ask the Father for bread, He will not give you a stone. And most of us probably don't realize that how many times we ask for stones and don't know it. We don't realize it. That's what He's doing, is trying to get people's attention. How long has this boy been like this? Forever. So that's asking, that's expectation. If he's been like that forever, he may forever be like this. So Jesus is interrupting that. Stop thinking that way. Change the way you think. And the guy says, I would like to, help me. And that's the power Jesus gives. He helps him change his mind. Something in that relationship which does not survive the story, the gospel story. We don't know exactly what happened. If we were there, we could see eye contact, we could see body language, see all the stuff that happened. If you ever watch a faith healer on television, or maybe you've been to one and see how they operate, you can see how they change people's minds. You can see this is a great deal of the power behind them. We never know how long a healing will last, and we never know how long the mind will stay changed. But I was looking up the Lourdes of France, the healing pool there. And I kind of in passing said the Pool of Bethesda, they probably built up a charity system around that, where there were donations coming in and all of that. So that got me to thinking, what happens at Lourdes? How's that run? Same thing. It's by charity. And it's in the millions. Millions of tourists come there a year. They have gift shops. They pay a staff. They have people setting up pilgrimages. It's a big industry. Science has examined that water and found it's no different than any other water. Something's changing people's minds when they go there. But if you said there's no power in this water, you would not only, you would destroy an industry, and who wants that? They're not going to want that. That's why we want to keep Jesus as a miracle worker. That's why we want to keep him as he's coming back sometime. That's why we do all this stuff, to keep the industry going. So we've got to separate ourselves from that kind of thinking. The water in your bathtub has as much healing power as the water in Lourdes, France, according to scientists. So that would take a pretty big change of mind. Because by the time you got over there, you'd spend a lot of money, you'd put a lot of effort into thinking, if I get there, I'm going to touch something that will change my life. And it may, because you change your mind. But the whole process of financing yourself, of planning, of going, doing that pilgrimage, that's a change of mind. That's a big change. So what I'm saying here is the miracle working power is always with us. The so-called miracle working power, it's always with us. That's the important thing. So hold this direction, knowing that you are cooperating not with some miracle working cosmic force, but with the natural flow of God, as within, so without. We demystify this whole process. You've got something, how many of you have had a problem and said it would take a miracle to solve this? Probably all of us have said that sometime in our lives. And apparently it's solved, so I guess you had the miracle because you're here. But we say things like this, like it would take a miracle. That's so big a problem. I've got such a big problem. It would take a miracle to fix it. So if we have one of those, we back up and we say, I'm open and receptive to that same creative life force that will open a kernel of corn and produce several other things. It's happening in me now. Don't expect a miracle. You've heard that. Expect a miracle. You see that on bumper stickers. Expect a miracle. But don't expect a miracle. Listen to me. Expect the best and highest outcome for yourself and all involved. Your solution may look like a miracle, but it is the natural outworking of the cosmic river flowing from the inside out. So what we're really doing is elevating our thought. We're saying, I'm already involved in this cosmic process. Can I cooperate with it? Will I cooperate with it? And how do I do that? I change the direction of my faith. Yes, all things are possible for those who believe, and I believe. That's we start with an affirmative state of mind. That's the miracle. And the miracle is we can actually go from a negative state of mind to a positive one. Thank you for watching this week's program. If you enjoyed this video, please share it with others. We want to reach as many people as we can, and we appreciate your help. We have many subjects in our video lineup, so feel free to take a look. If there's a topic you don't see and would like me to address, just put it in the comment section. I'd love to know what's on your mind. Thanks again for your interest in independent unity, and have a wonderful week.